Maraming salamat, Jessa, for the introduction. At marami ding salamat for the introduction or the backgrounder and AHA. Congratulations to AHA for being able to accomplish so much in so short a time and for being so relevant. So can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's jump right in, no? Okay, so I will start. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes, sir. We
okay.
can.
So we'll jump right in. So given the time, the topic today, I will focus on part 1, the practical problem solving. Maybe we'll see if we have an opportunity for part 2 on the decision making part. Okay. So here's an overview, quick overview. The session, I'll give you an overview of the topics, the objectives, and the process. Okay. What topics? 3 basic topics. We'll aim to answer 3 questions. What are problems? How solve problems? And problem solving or solving problems as a process. What are my objectives for you? Since this is just about an hour, we'll focus really on the conceptual level. Hopefully that you will learn about problem solving. And what outcomes? Hopefully you'll have a deeper understanding of problem solving, that you'll get fresh new perspectives, that this session will provoke a review, a reevaluation, even a questioning of your own and other people's problem solving approaches. And hopefully it will motivate all of you to explore new, different approaches and dig deeper and learn more and improve your skill in problem solving. Process, I will try to make this as interactive and active as possible, to be as evocative as possible, and I will be a little bit, I will iterate a bit, which is another word for repeat. Okay. In terms of interaction, I encourage all of you to question, to respond, but also listen, read where it's appropriate, particularly the chat responses. React, interact, both in your mind and in the chat box. Take notes if you can. No? And during and after the session, reflect on what we have talked about. Evocative, I encourage you to draw from and relate to your own experience. Iterative, because I will be tackling the topics, first providing an overview, general, then I will go into a little bit of specifics. And here is the flow. We'll start with definitions, we'll drill down into the specifics, and then we'll do a quick recap. Again, given the time, we may not be able to go into a lot of detail in some of the aspects. Okay? So let's start with definitions. Okay, let me start with a question for all of you. Can you quickly share one problem that concerns you now? And can you quickly write this in your chat box, in the chat box? Okay. Hold that. I need to work it out so I can see the chat box. Hold on. Okay. Any more? Okay, maybe we can pause for now. Okay. Okay, let's pause for now. And can I now ask you to again review the responses? And as you go through them, again, write in the chat box, what are some common characteristics that you see among the list that was shared? Okay, so let me write here now, common okay. Can you now begin to fill it in? What common characteristics do you see? Or what adjectives can describe or characteristics can describe what you list as your problems? Those are your feelings. But how about the characteristics? When you say a problem, the question is, what makes a problem or what characterizes a problem? Any more? Take a look. Let me go through some of them. Okay. Lack of job opportunities. Not enough money to support myself and my family. The pandemic, COVID-19. You don't have a productive environment or poor environment for my studies. Jobless. Okay. What else? When I say money, I guess you mean lack of money, right? Okay. The other one is heavy volume of work. Okay. So, what do you see as common or adjectives can you use to describe those things? Any more ideas? Okay. Okay. So, let me share with you my take on what I see as some of the characteristics and basically go into a definition of the problem. Okay. So, what is a problem? No, there is a specification of a desired outcome. Let's look at some of the responses, right? Fatigue. The desired outcome is you're not fatigued, right? So fatigue is the opposite. Overwhelmed. The desired outcome is you're not overwhelmed, right? You don't want to be overwhelmed. What else? Finishing your project. That's a desired outcome. Maybe the reality is you're unable to finish your project, right? Jobless. The desired outcome is you want to have a job. You say not enough money. The desired outcome is you want to have enough money, right? So actually, when you say a problem, there are at least two dimensions. No? A problem is a situation where implicitly you have a desired outcome, as you can see from what you have listed down here. Although a number of you, it's okay, listed the actual outcome. Okay. And there is a deviation between the desired and the actual outcome, right? So for example, when you say you're fatigued, that's the actual outcome, but the desired outcome is that you don't want to be tired. So the deviation is that you are actually fatigued and it's undesirable. Okay? Now, There is one other dimension which is not explicit in your responses, but which I'm sharing with you now, is it is a problem when the reasons for why there is a deviation is unknown. Okay? For example, if you don't know why you are fatigued, if you don't know why you are jobless, if you don't know why you are sick, if you don't know why you are anxious, right? Then you have a problem, right? So for our purposes, the definition of a problem is when there is a deviation between the desired and actual outcomes, and the reasons and causes for the deviation is or are unknown. Okay? So that's for our purposes. Now, some of the things that I asked you that you've listed actually are, to me, are not problems if they don't fit the way I define it, okay? The way we're defining it. Some of them represent choices that you have to make, which is it will be the subject of another topic of discussion, right? But this is our definition of a problem. Okay? Now, question again, you write in the chat box. If we follow that definition, okay, my question to you is, how then do you solve the problem that you have cited? What steps do you take? How do you go about solving the problem? Can I ask you again to just write briefly your responses in the chat box? Go. Okay, recognize the problem, find out the reasons for the deviation. I guess by that you mean awareness. Awareness is a general concept. Okay. Next, break down into tasks and schedule them. Look for solutions. Be more productive. Identify the root of the problem, and then from there, plan out what to do. Okay. Time management. Connect virtually with friends. Mitigation, prevention, precautionary measures. Weigh things out and plan. Okay. Think positive, so there's an issue of attitude. Examine the consequences. Okay, let's pause now. And, okay, let's go back. And from the responses, if I were to ask you now to sort of organize the things that were shared in terms of how to go about solving a problem, right? How would you go about organizing it in a sequence of steps? And here is what I propose from what you have listed, right? The first step is you probably will have to define what the problem is, okay? Second, you have to identify the reasons or causes of the problem, right? Remember, when we say what a problem is, it requires that you define first the desired outcome. Then you have to spell out what is the present situation. Then you have to define the deviation. Then you have to identify the reasons, right? Okay. Then you take action to address, correct, remove the causes of the deviation, right? Okay. Then you have to see, once you take action, whether your action was effective, right? And some of you listed also that you will have to also check out the consequences of your action, right? And part of taking action means that you have to communicate, okay, etc. And all of this, of course, you have to have a positive attitude that somehow the problem can be addressed. And once you finish that, and if things don't go right, you will have to review and repeat the process, right? Okay. So, quick recap. This is important, okay? For our purposes, a problem is when there is a deviation between a desired and actual outcomes, and the reasons and causes for the deviation is unknown. Let me highlight that last part. Because if you already know the reason, then you don't have a problem. You just need to take action. Okay? Repeat, 4 components: desired outcomes, actual outcomes. You need both to determine whether there is a deviation. Then you have to find the causes, and the causes are unknown, right? So what is problem solving? Here I've spelled it out as defining an outcome, specifying a deviation, identifying the causes, and taking steps to address the causes, and verifying that the steps taken were effective. Okay. Let's move on. Let's drill down, okay? Because what we've said in the definitions, there are some fairly big words that perhaps are worth spending a little time on in terms of a deeper understanding. And here, I will drill down on outcomes, problem situations, cause-effect relationships, and how to identify the operative causes. Again, question, okay? Give one example of a desired outcome based on your problem or some problem that you have come across. So can I ask you again to put in the chat box an example of a desired outcome that's important to you? Yes, quality employment. Productive involvement of youth. Yes, a healthy family. Yes, increasing productivity. Okay, good. Lesser workload. Go on. Any more? Societal change. Finish the school work within the day. Okay, that's one definition of better productivity. Okay. Improving skills. Okay, and progressive benefits. Good grades, or even to get a scholarship. Okay. Change of behavior, assuming better behavior. Okay, let's pause with those responses, okay? As an outcome. Okay, empowered, engaging class positively. Okay, let's pause now. And if you go through the range of responses on outcomes, right? Here's my way of describing a number of them, no? Okay. One, an outcome can be general. For example, you say productivity, but an outcome can also be specific, right? One response was, hold on, to say finish schoolwork within the day, right? So that's a specific example of productivity. Productivity as an outcome is general, but the specific one is finish schoolwork within a day. Okay. It can be single outcome, can be multiple, right? Actually, let's go back here. Family free of sickness is general, right? But specifically, if you want the family to be free of COVID, then you be a bit more specific, right? Okay. And then societal change is a very general concept here, positive change. But one example of societal change could be what? The people are gainfully employed. Okay. Now, if you note, you have listed a range of outcomes, right? Health, generally, productivity, workload, what else? Employment, yeah, okay, societal change. So outcomes can be single, can be multiple. Next. Now, I deliberately use the word outcomes in general, okay? But I guess you are probably asking the question, what is the difference between goals, objectives, outcomes, results, etc.? Right? Okay. These all refer to similar concepts. How do we grapple with this? Are they different? Are they the same? My answer there is, ultimately, they are different terms referring to goals and objectives And the way to deal with it is to organize it in a hierarchy. But I will go back to that later. Okay. Another characteristic perhaps is that they can be linked and related, right? For example, if a worker has increased productivity, then maybe the worker can earn better incomes, right? And if a worker can earn better incomes, then maybe he or she can buy medicines or buy better food and therefore help in himself and the family to be a bit more healthy, right? And not sick. So in that sense, the outcomes are linked and related. But they can be related in a hierarchical sense, right? Meaning from top to bottom, right? In a cause-effect relationship, or they can be linked in a loop or a cycle. Now I'll give you a graphic to illustrate what I mean. Okay. So here is an example: Sustainable Development Goals. Right? They are multiple. The way they are listed, they are general. And if you drill down to the SDGs, they probably will have subsets of that, specifics of that. Okay. So I will go back to the outcomes a little later, but right now, let me ask you the question. Given the definition that a problem situation is when there is a deviation between desired and actual outcomes, and the reasons or causes are unknown, how do you know when you have a problem? Let me share a few situations, okay? When you have no stated or defined outcomes, what do you think? Do you have a problem? My answer is no, you don't have a problem yet because you haven't defined your outcomes. So, what action to take? You first have to define your outcomes. When there is no stated or defined deviation, do you have a problem? The answer in my answer is still you don't know if you have a problem. So you have to define and see whether first there is a deviation between what you state as your defined outcome, for example, healthy or COVID-free, right, versus the deviation. Okay? Third, do you own the desired outcome? For example, do you care to be healthy? If you don't care to be healthy and you are sick, of course, everybody wants to be healthy, but this is an example, then it's not your problem, right? It's someone else's problem. Ignore it. Have you identified the cause or causes of the problem? If the answer is yes, it is no longer a problem. You just need to take action and address the cause. So, all of those situations, you don't have a problem. So in reverse, they define conditions for which you need to be able to make possible to help you move forward in defining a problem and in solving the problem. Okay? Now, let me share again, focus now. So I've talked about the problem situation. Let me go to types of deviations. No? A way of looking at types of deviations. One type is when outcomes have been previously achieved. And here is a graphic, right? You have previously been able to hit the target, but now you are missing the target. So another example is you previously have been healthy, right? No headache. Now you have a headache, okay? But there is another one, right? Where the outcomes have never been achieved. You've never hit the target. Okay? An example would be, well, at least at the societal level, poverty in the Philippines, right? We want to be poverty-free. That's the outcome. But go back to history until now, have we ever achieved a poverty-free Philippines? Well, the answer is no. Okay? Now, question to think about. How will the type of deviation affect the problem solving approach. In the first one, you must have done something right in the first place. And perhaps your task now is to ask, what went wrong? Why did I miss the target this time? Okay? In the second one, you have to ask yourself, why have I never achieved the target? Is it an issue with the target, or is it an issue with my understanding of, how to reach the target, right? Addressing the causes. Right? I'll skip that second question. Okay. Now, here's another question. In your response earlier, part of the step of problem solving is to identify the causes, right? But let's just level off on our understanding of other words for causes. Okay? Can I ask you now to just quickly write what you think are other words that are similar or mean the same thing as causes? Can you start now in the chat box? Other words for causes. Okay, source, spark, origin, go on. Catalyst, the root. Okay, any more? Yes, root. Source. Objective. Okay. Next, can you write in the chat box also reasons? Okay. What are other words for effects? Result, outcomes. Go on. Okay, outcome. Consequences, yes. The event, the output, okay. The aftermath, yes. The reaction, yes. The fruit of your labor, output. Okay, great. So, the product, okay, great. We should add some of your responses to this list, but I prepared a preliminary list, okay, which will need to be expanded with your responses. Causes, another word for causes are factors, right? That did not come out, but reasons came out. And then for the more mathematical minded, it's an independent variable, right? Now, this is not an exhaustive list. You've expanded the list. That's great. Okay. Next, effects. You said outcomes, goals, dependent variable, objectives, results. Okay. So it's important to understand that these are synonyms. They mean the same things. Okay. So when you speak, when you share, realize that you're talking about the same things. But it's important to differentiate between cause and effect. Okay. Next. Like to drill down between the definitions of cause-effect relationships. Okay. Let me propose that the hypothesis is a statement of a cause-effect relationship. Other names, theory of change, mental models, mind maps, etc. Okay. Can I ask you again to quickly give an example of a hypothesis or a cause-effect relationship and put this in the chat box. Go. I'll give you a little bit more time to think about it. And this one, you will not be able to address it with a one-word response, right? So you have to have a cause and an effect. But state a hypothesis or a cause-effect relationship. You can refer back to what you have listed as a problem and define what is the root and what is the reaction, what is the input and what is the output. Okay. The student does intense amount of work, hence fatigue, and is not sleeping well. Okay. Drainage is clogged, then it will cause, then heavy rains will flood, will cause the flood. Okay? The reason for the downfall is their action. So some action resulted in a downfall. Okay? Now the fatigue is causing low productivity, okay, on personal work. Okay? Maybe you mean high remarks or high marks and long essays, right? So maybe the hypothesis there is that if you write long essays, you get high marks, okay? Okay, so climate change is the cause of, well, maybe you need to spell out, severe or badly affected, right? Okay, if you don't review, then you get low marks. Okay, great. Let's pause now. Okay. So no, you have stated cause-effect relationships, right? Okay. At various levels. So, great. Now, why is it called a hypothesis? For example, if you say a clogged drainage will cause flooding when it rains. Why is it called a hypothesis or a theory? Because proof is needed. Yeah, that's right. Okay, to show that in fact it is the plugging that is causing the flooding, right? So you have to validate it, you have to test it, whether the cause-effect relationship that you have spelled out is in fact the real or operative cause-effect relationship, right? Great. Okay. So no, it's all theory, right? Question, another question. How do you learn about or develop your hypothesis for a particular situation? Can I ask you again to write in the chat box ideas for how you can learn and develop your hypothesis for a particular situation? Okay, observation, theory making, observation, yes, great. Any more? The result, yes. Okay, so observation, perhaps the observation will lead you to need to observe some possibility of the relationship between the two. Then you need to get the evidence, right? Okay. So reading, surveys, observing patterns, all those are attempts at getting information. But getting information about what? About the effects, about the causes, and perhaps with the patterns will allow you to get ideas about prevailing cause-effect, possible cause-effect relationships. Okay. Yep. Okay. Let's pause now and let me move to the next. Right. So you've stated really, a hypothesis and sources of how you can develop a hypothesis, right? Okay. Now let me go to just a classification of cause-effect relationships or types of hypothesis. The first one is simplest, right? If you eat, then you won't go hungry, right? So that's a simple cause-effect. What's here in the slide is saying, if it rains and you don't have an umbrella, you're gonna get wet and you're outside. If you water the seed, then the seed will grow, right? So these are simple, single cause, single outcome, or single effect. Now I ask another question, right? Think about how many types of cause-effect relationships are there? Okay, how do they differ? Well, this one, I will just share with you my observations, okay? First is there are certain cause and effect relationships that are known and some that are unknown, right? For example, when COVID first hit, do we really know The causes of COVID, all we knew was people got sick, right? At that point in time, it was unknown, right? The sickness was unknown and the cause of the sickness was also unknown. But if you say the relationship between hunger and what? And weight, you know that, okay? Second, cause-effect relationships can be simple, as in the one I cited, right? If it rains, I get wet, or it can be complex, okay? By complex, we mean we may have several causes and several outcomes, right? And they are linked in some way. And then the third is the extent to which the cause-effect relationships are predictable. Here I have three, It's deterministic. For example, you're sure if it rains and I'm outside, I will get wet, right? But if you ask, will I get wet? Well, it depends on whether it will rain. Will it rain? You're not sure, right? Depends on the weather. There is a probability whether it will rain or not. And so therefore, there is some probability as to whether I will get wet or not. Third is when it's totally chaotic, meaning that you can't even know and you can't even predict, right? The nature of the causes, the nature of the effects, and the relationship. Okay? Now, let me expand a little on the simple versus complex. One is the number of causes and effects. You can have a single cause-effect relationship, which is what we've cited as examples. You can have multiple causes and multiple effects, right? Like the SDGs, right? Okay. Then a second dimension that perhaps brings about complexity is when the cause-effect relationship is linear, when the cause-effect relationship is multi-level or hierarchical, right? Okay. And when the cause-effect relationship is looping or cyclical. You all have heard of the word or the concept of a vicious cycle, right? Okay. So one example of a simple vicious cycle is no income, right? So therefore, not able to buy food, get hungry, become unhealthy, and when it becomes unhealthy, unable to find work, and because they're unable to find work, then they get low income, right? So that's a loop. That's a vicious loop. Okay? And the extent to which these causes and effects are interlinked or related. Okay, so again, here is a simple cause-effect relationship. Here is a diagram of a multiple or a hierarchical cause-effect relationship. Okay, I did not put in any more the different aspects, but you can lay on your own, fill in, right? For example, you can put at the top low income. What are the causes of low income? It could be skills, it could be lack of employment opportunities. What are the causes of lack of skills? It could be education, right? It could be the aptitude to learn, right? So on and so forth. You can go down. You get the drift, right? Now, here is an example of a chart that shows multiple outcomes, right? Increased incomes, improved physical access to good quality services, improved security and state presence in zones of influence. I just lifted this up. Okay? Note also that there are multiple levels of objectives or causes, right? Okay? So here is another example. This is a bit more complex situation now, right? Okay? And then finally, here is an example of a systems loop. Right? I won't go into the detail, but you can see how the different causes and effects are linked, right? And it is not just one loop, but there are several loops, and the loops cut across other loops and contribute to other factors. For example, if you look at the sales, right, back office loading, and then right, so you appreciate the complexity. Okay. Then to complicate it even further, sometimes these relationships are volatile, they're uncertain, they are complex, or they are ambiguous, meaning, you don't really know what's happening, right? So challenging. So, but what is the relevance of all of these definitions and typologies? Here, I propose a simple way of just classifying it and understanding. Okay. Here, let me simplify it by saying, okay, what if I have a type A cause relationship where the cause-effect relationship is known, where it is simple, and where it is deterministic? I cited an example, right? If it rains and I don't have an umbrella, for sure, and I am outside, for sure I will get wet. Okay. Let me go to the other extreme, where a cause-effect relationship is unknown, right? When COVID struck, all we knew was people got sick with symptoms, didn't know what the causes were, right? It was complex, and it was initially chaotic. Now, if we juxtapose this with the type of deviation, type 1, where you have previously attained an outcome, and type 2, this is just my classification of where the outcomes have never been attained, right? And you put it together, okay? Deviation type, goal previously attained. Deviation type 2, goal never attained. Cause-effect relationship, type A, known, simple, deterministic. Type Z, unknown, complex, chaotic, right? What does it suggest? You have to understand the nature of the deviation and the cause-effect relationships, because each of them may require you to take on a different problem-solving approach, right? Okay. Now, we won't go into the details of the different approaches. I'll just provide a quick overview. But I believe this is an important way to understand the reality of your situations. You have to be able to classify it, because there is no one-size-fits-all approach. Okay. So just to recap, right? It's important that you understand the problem-solving contexts, which I refer to as a type of problem situation, which is the deviations, and the nature of the cause-effect relationships. Now, okay, what are the different general approaches to solving a problem or identifying the causes? We typically draw on past experience or theory and see if that past experience can apply to the present situation. Sometimes we apply a deductive process or a process of elimination. You have a list of possible causes, then you go through a process of identifying and eliminating which is not a cause and which ultimately is the probable cause. Sometimes you have to actually conduct an experiment, right? You have to test. Okay? In COVID, that was what the scientists have had to do and are continuing to do now at various levels, right? Testing, particularly, for example, the vaccines, or testing the transmission factors, right? I go into discovery and exploration. As I said, all of the above needs some sort of prioritization, because you have to choose. It depends on the situation. No one size fits all. Okay. Now, admittedly, for today, just dwell at the general way of the approaches. We don't have time to go into the specifics, but hopefully this will tweak your interest to drill down and look for specific approaches. Okay. Now, let me just go through the idea of problem solving as a process. Okay. As we discussed, there is actually a series or a set of common steps to problem solving. Second, problem solving context and problem solving approaches will depend, right? The approaches will depend on the contexts. Right? Third, let me discuss problem solvers and then characteristics, which I aim to relate more to your situation. Okay. So let me recap the steps. You have to define the outcome. You have to specify the deviation. You have to identify the reasons, the causes of the deviation. You have to take action, and you have to monitor and test to see if the problem is addressed. Then you have to repeat the process. And as you realize, while it sounds simple, identify the causes of the deviation. the nature of the cause-effect relationships and the nature of the deviations can range from simple to complex, and there can be a whole range of appropriate responses depending on the situation. Okay, so if you aim to solve poverty, right, it's a complex situation, and many countries, actually most countries, have not solved it yet. Right? It's different from simply saying, you know, I'm hungry, I wanna become not hungry. Okay. Now let me just go to problem solving can be at two levels, no? At the individual level and at the group and the organizational level. And I just want to highlight, particularly at the group or organizational level, that when you are solving problems with a group, you need to have common definitions. You need to have agreement on a common set of steps or processes. And you need, with common definitions and common processes and steps, you also need common tools, right? Tools for common understanding. Okay? We've talked about definitions, we've talked about process and steps. And well, we did not explicitly discuss communication tools for common understanding. But if you go back to the charts that I have shown, for example, well, this one, let me go back one quickly. See, you can actually use these as communication tools. Once you make your cause-effect relationship explicit and write it down, then you allow everyone to read and understand where you're coming from, right? So while these are used as examples of different types of cause-effect relationships, these can be used as tools for mapping out your hypothesis or your cause-effect relationships, and which then can be used as tools for communication and tools for verification. Okay? Let me move on now. Almost done. So, just to recap, we've drilled down on the concept of outcomes, we've drilled down on problem situations, we've discussed in a little bit more detail different types of cause-effect relationships and their implications for approaches, right? We did not exactly talk about how to isolate causes, but what we did say is that depending on the nature of the cause-effect relationships, you know, it will require different approaches on identifying the operative causes, right? And finally, we did discuss and emphasize the importance of problem solving as a process. Okay? So here's a quick recap of what we've taken. Put a star. Hopefully, you'll agree that we've at least discussed what are problems. We've discussed briefly how to solve problems, and we have emphasized problem solving as a process. In terms of the process, I hope that we were interactive and active, that we were evocative, and we were iterative. And I hope right now that you will gain a deeper understanding, that this session has provoked you, right, to reevaluate, to question, and hopefully also motivated you to explore new different approaches, dig deeper in terms of your understanding and the way you go about solving problems. But in 1 hour's time, of course, we only have just touched the tip of the iceberg. That's it. And thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sir Ronald. Teach
Salamat
Joji.
po. Yes. Salamat, Sir Ronald Chua. Alam mo, Teach, sa session na yun, I like the cycle to solve the problem wherein you would define the problem, identify the causes, take action and remove these causes. And lastly, test if the problem is addressed. I think it's really effective once you use that cycle, no?
Oo, napaka-effective talaga. Alam mo, feeling ko nga teach kanina, nasa thesis class ako, parang sabi ko, shucks, ito na siya, ito na siya. Yan, sinabi din sa akin ni Teach Melody, sa thesis, ganyan yung mga tinuturo. I was like, oh my gosh, nararamdaman ko na yung pagiging third year, Sir Ronald. Thank you so much po. Yeah, so definitely thank you for everything na nasabi niyo po, Sir Ronald. You made me think more critical, and at the same time sa pagdating sa problems, we can't just say na isang problema tong bagay na to when we didn't define kung ano ba yung outcome na gusto natin. So talagang napaka-informative, sabi nga ng mga nagko-comment diyan sa ating chat box. So kayo mga kasama, ano ba yung natutunan nyo ngayon kay Sir Ronald? So, meron po tayong mga question and answer portion. Are you up for the challenge, Sir Ronald, sa mga question and answer ng mga ating kasama?
Of course, yes.
Of course, yan. So, our chat
But
box po
word of
is...
warning, no? And Jayton can attest to that. My habit is to answer a question with another question. Okay?
Oh. Ka-challenge naman po yon. So, our chat box is open para po sa mga questions ng ating mga kasama. If you wanna ask something to Sir Ronald, you may do so. So, let's check the chat box. Yan, madami pong nag-thank you sa inyo, Sir Ronald.
Okay, you're all welcome. Yeah. Ay tama si Jayton, mabait ako. Don't be afraid to ask questions.
Ayan po, meron po tayong question from Teach Melody. Ayan. Teach Jessa talked about involving the community and problem solving in terms of the process you mentioned a while ago. Where does the community take an active part?
Okay, good question. Maybe you have to ask yourself, what are your objectives for involving the community? That's one. And second, once you have the answer, what do you think? Right? It all depends on your objective. But what is the ideal situation? Would you want a situation where the community is just told about the solution? Or would you want a situation where the community is involved from the very start? Remember earlier, a number of you talked about the community's needs and identifying their needs. Isn't that the first step, right? Okay. So I guess my bias is, if you can, you need to involve the community in every part of the process, right? And here you have a concrete example of problem solving by a group. And so my thoughts about the prerequisites for effective problem solving as a group become important. Meaning, if you want to involve the community, you have to level off, for example, on a set of common definitions, diba? On a set of common approaches, right? And on a set of ways to communicate to each other. Okay. Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does answer the question your desired outcome. Whether it is general or specific, you have to consider every factor talaga po. So here's another question from Teacher Pat po. What do you suggest when evaluations show that the problem is still not yet solved, despite many repetitions of the problem-solving process?
Okay, maybe I have to ask you back, right? In fact, here again, this is a problem situation too, right? Your problem situation is that somehow you've repeated it, but the problem is not solved, right? So what do you think you should do? It's a rhetorical question, but okay, in the end, you probably will have to break down, right? You have to ask a series of questions based on that framework. First, you have to ask the definition of the outcomes, right? You have to repeat that process. The definition of the present situation, right? And then the causes, your hypothesis. Maybe you need to revisit your hypothesis, right? And then finally, you continue to test. But ultimately, there is no substitute for, you just have to repeat. And maybe you have to ask also, how can you improve and make more systematic your process of iteration, right? Because you have to be systematic in say, if I do this and there's no result, then how do I move to the next one, right? So you have to ask yourself how, well, your mental models, your mental maps, you have to revisit that, right? But I guess there is no escaping the need to repeat the process. But you have to learn, hopefully, from each process. And take a look at it positively, right? If you had been tracking your actions, with each action that you take, you have a stated hypothesis. The fact that the problem was not solved, you've learned something new, right? Which is that this particular action or cause-effect relationship is not working or is not the one that is causing the problem in this particular situation. And you have accumulated a number of those. So the positive thing is you probably have eliminated several factors already, right? From before you started, you just have to continue to repeat the process. Okay.
Thank you po so much, Sir Ronald. Grabe, fully loaded po yung brain ko with the information na binibigay niyo po sa amin. And sa lahat po ng nanonood dyan sa Facebook Live or sa Zoom, we will have to say goodbye po sa mga nasa live po. Hello po dyan sa inyong lahat. And again, next week, we will have Miss Sabrina Angkiko sharing us.
May isang tanong po, sorry to cut you off.
Sorry
There's
po.
one good question in the chat box from James Able.
Oh, I'm so sorry po. I did not see that. Okay, for our last question po. From James Paul. Hi, James Paul. This pandemic is a huge problem we face today. My question is, does the solution presented by the government solve it, or it has brought more problems for educational purposes lang po?
I think, James, if you apply what we discussed, you probably will have the answer to your question. But let me just respond quickly. Okay. The pandemic, is it a simple problem or a complex problem? It's a complex problem, right? And then when you say the solutions presented by the government, right? I guess you have to drill down and say, and I guess we will have to simply agree that certain solutions aimed at addressing certain causes did result in desired outcomes. But certain solutions resulted in unintended consequences and brought more problems. An example of a vicious cycle, di ba? During the lockdown, they set up checkpoints, tama? To screen. Okay? So what was the unintended consequence? Crowding. And then the crowding resulted in possibly higher transmissions, right? Okay? So in a complex situation, it's inevitable that certain actions result in positive results, but certain actions result in negative ones, right? But for the pandemic, because it's complex, right? Unless you list down and say, okay, what are the top 5 priorities, for example, of desired outcomes? And you have to have a checklist and say, okay, which ones have been accomplished? However, what are also the consequences? And you have to assess whether the consequences have been good or bad, right? So there is no simple answer to your question. For example, the lockdown was an attempt to address the cause of transmission. What was the unintended consequence? Economic slowdown and loss of income. Diba? So look at how complex that situation is. Right? Okay. That's it.
Did that answer po your question, sir?
I
Ayan,
think
si
he said
Sir
maraming
James. Maraming
salamat.
salamat daw po. Ang daming problema sa mundo. That's true. And I think we really do need to um prioritize some na talagang nag-a-affect sa atin. And may nagsabi na friend ko na sometimes when you don't define the problem, you make more problems. So, it's true. Kailangan talaga natin i-define and we should know where we should go as well para
Yung opposite ko dyan is if you don't define the problem, you don't have a problem.
if you don't if you don't define a problem, you don't have a problem. So,
Yun. Okay.
thank you po, Sir Ronald. Ang daming learnings.
Yes, maraming salamat po Sir Ronald for that helpful equation. For all of us who are facing different problems, we can make smarter decisions. Maraming salamat din po for the time, for taking the time to answer all our questions. We are better and smarter individuals who learned a lot from this. So, thank you din sa lahat ng mga nanonood ng Facebook Live or Zoom. But to our Facebook Live, we will have to say goodbye. See you again next week and with Miss Sabrina sharing us about evidence-based teachings.
Maraming
So, ayun.
salamat po. And first, may we have a picture taking po para sa ating lahat?
Yes.
I-ready na po natin yung mga smile natin. Ayan, ayan. Ang gaganda naman po ng mga smile ng bawat isa. Are we all ready? Meron po tayong 2 pages, so I'll have to take 2 photos po. 1, 2, 3. And for the next page naman po, let's go. And 1, 2, and 3.
Pwedeng one more pa for my end. Thank you.
Sige.
Sure po,
One
go
more.
lang, Sir Mark.
One more. 1, 2, 3.
So, smile lang tayo dyan.
Yun. Thank you so much.
So now we will be proceeding to our next activity. Instead of our usual programming with breakout rooms, we will have one plenary session. It's time for the participants to answer a question instead. Here's our empathy circle question for the day. With the many problems our communities are experiencing right now, what would you want prioritized, why, and how would you want to address it?
Yan. So,
Ay, pero
guys,
before that, Teach, ituro mo naman yung mga thumbs up sa mga
ayan.
empathy circle natin, Teach.
So, for our empathy circle, yan, napaka-famous nito. We have the safe space to share ideas, yung improving listening skills natin and foster relationship. Our 3 parts will be, first is to listen. Listen ka sa mga kasama mo dyan. Second is to share kung ano yung mga nafe-feel mo din. And the last one is to respond. So, paano tayo makakapag-share, listen, and respond? Meron tayong 4 na signs. First is the love, yan. Yung heart button, pwede din nating i-press yan. Second is the observation. If you have an observation. The next one is relate. And the last one is question. Yan. Are you all ready para sa ating question? Gusto mo bang ulitin, Sir Teach Joji, para sa ating question sa ating mga kasama dito?
No problem, Teacher Miles.
Thank
So,
you.
with the many problems our communities are experiencing right now, what would you want prioritized? Why? And how would you want to address it? Ito si Ethan, sabi niya, we have no problem because I won't define it.
Oh, saray.
Para daw walang problema, hindi niya na lang
Hindi na
i-define.
define.
Pero paano yung iba sa ating empathy circle?
You
You
can
may use
comment
the
down.
chat box.
Mhm. Ikaw, Teach, ano sa tingin mo yung sa'yo?
Yung sa akin, well, for me, the problem I want to address is the COVID-19 pandemic. I think our government should really address this in a better manner so that we will be normalized soon. Ang daming problema concerning sa mga jobs ng iba. Yung iba wala ng trabaho at hirap maghanap ng trabaho. For us students naman, hoping for face-to-face classes. For the how, I believe they should have other types of vaccines. The only available vaccine as of the moment is Sinovac. But some people are not willing to get vaccinated because they prefer other vaccines like Pfizer. So ayun, like katulad ng parents ko, ayaw pa nila magpa-vaccine kasi hindi nila masyado trust yung Sinovac. So for me, that's one way to address lang the problem we have now.
Oo nga, no? So, makakalabas-labas na din yung mga nagpapa-vaccine, ganyan. Pero the effect ongoing pandemic. So, sabi ni Sir Ronald pala sa chat box, oh, Ethan, that is one approach to problem solving. Ignore or escape. Do you want to ignore it, Ethan? Ayan, meron tayong ano. Meron po tayo galing kay Mary Christ. I will prioritize our health because we are now in a health crisis, and I will address it by means of organizing different publication materials to show the importance of our health. Since we are in a modern world, we cannot deny the people mostly use gadgets that somehow forget about their health. Therefore, spreading awareness will be of big help. Spreading awareness. Paano nyo po isi-spread yung awareness? Ma'am Mary, yan. Sabi naman ni Sinky M. Dapatuan, may problem right now is Ethan.
Si Ethan.
Grabe naman po
Okay.
yun. Grabe naman.
Sir Pat naman, ang priority niya, education and equity during the pandemic. Yung how niya, use of multimedia that is basic and most accessible. Train teachers to deliver in a distance learning setup. Yeah, I believe we should use multimedia to our advantage. It's really helpful wherein you can spread a lot of awareness through multimedia. And talking about awareness, I believe my favorite quote, I quote, na the first step in solving a problem is recognizing there is one. So if we raise more awareness, I believe we can solve the problem in a better manner.
Yes.
Ayun.
Totoo po yan. Napag-usapan din natin yan last week, no? Parang kailangan aware ka sa mga nangyayari. So,
Yes.
kay Alicia naman, sabi niya, poverty because it is also one of the main causes why people are pushed to do illegal things. I would address that by helping them cope with their problems because sometimes they are the ones who are left behind in our country. Totoo yan. May study na parang sa Saudi Arabia dito. Less yung mga taong nagnanakaw. Although meron kasi silang an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life, it is also because the government is giving them what they need. Yung pera, binibigyan sila kahit di sila nakapagtrabaho. When you're a citizen here, ganun yung mga nangyayari. Kaya walang masyadong crime. I believe na tama din si Alicia. Some people are pushed to do illegal things because of poverty. Ayan.
At kay Mary naman, Mary Pasqua, through publication materials po, that can be posted online and using the social media as a platform po. Also, agree nga siya sa use of multimedia. And ang last naman kay Chris, I want to address the healthcare and well-being of the people. I believe that if the people in our community are healthy, everything will follow. Students can actively participate in class, business persons can continue to expand their network, and people can continue to do their own responsibilities. To address it, I would start on our community where I will involve more people who are willing to volunteer in addressing local issues in health in our municipality and further expand it. Yeah.
Grabe.
Mm-mm.
Ang dami. Ayan pa si Teach Melody. Um, Sabi ni John Ray naman, sa kanya daw mental health issues because it is a rising problem among young people and professionals alike. Take part in advocacy programs that promote mental health and psychological wellness across the sectors. That is true, lalo na ngayon, during the pandemic. And of course, after the pandemic as well, kung ano yung iko-cause nitong problem when it comes to our mental health.
Yes, ang daming nagsisend ng answers. Sila Teach Melody, sila Lance, sila Hamida. Thank you everyone for answering and taking part in the empathy circle. All your answers are very much acknowledged. Thank you so much. And now, I feel emotionally recharged seeing how generations come together for our nation. At this point, I would like to call on my fellow AHA co-create member, Teach Zed, to wrap up our discussion with his closing remarks.
Ayan, thank you Teacher Georgie. At bago pang lahat, nais kong pasalamatan ang lahat ng nag-a-attend at lahat ng umattend, kahit yung mga nasa Facebook Live natin kanina dyan at yung mga nasa Zoom call. Salamat dahil sa inyo naging posible ang pagbabahagi namin mula sa AHA. Malaking pasalamat din kay Professor Ronald Chua at sa kanyang mahusay at malinaw na pagdidiscuss ng topic natin ngayong linggo. We are grateful for everyone that is present today here on our Zoom call. Bago tayo matapos, nais ko lang kumuha ng aking mga napulot mula sa talk ni Sir Ronald Chua. So to start the process of problem solving, we first must learn how to identify the problem. Kasama din dito is yung identification and defining of desired outcome. Now this is important because we should be able to tell whether we have a problem or not. Along with this, we must define the deviation between the desired outcome and actual outcome. Now problems arise from reasons for the deviation if it is unknown. So after natin ma-identify and ma-recognize yung mga problems, we should be able to do necessary steps to address the problem. And this test should be done ng paulit-ulit until the problem ceases to exist. Again, we must remember the four important components: desired and actual outcomes, deviation, and causes that are unknown. So aside from that, we should also be equipped with proper understanding on how to determine and handle the cause and effect relationships, like identifying the type of cause and effect. Sometimes hypothesis making may be necessary when solving problems so that we can apply all the things that we've learned from Sir Chua when we hypothesize in the future. Ayan, sana marami po tayong natutunan mula dito sa talk ni Sir Chua, and hopefully ma-apply natin lahat ng ating natutunan. At muli, salamat sa lahat ng mga AHA teachers, kay Teacher Georgie and Teacher Mas sa pag-lead ng napakamabungang session na to. Laking pasasalamat kay Sir Ronald Chua at sa inyong lahat. Laging tatandaan na AHA is here, and sa AHA, ang pagbabago ay nagsisimula sa inyo. Thank you.
Salamat Teach Zed, you wrapped up this event perfectly. At dyan na nagtatapos ang ating webinar. Masakit man sa puso, oras na para magpaalam.
Pero bago yan, Teach, inaanyayaan po namin ang lahat na sagutan po yung post-training service na isa-send po dito sa ating chat box para mabigay din po namin yung mga e-certificates nyo po sa email nyo. Don't hesitate to invite your fellow changemaker to join our last Pamana session next week. Sunod po, let us put in our schedule the session with Ma'am Sabrina Kiko with the topic of evidence-based teaching.
Yes.